Yay! Thank you so much, Monica, for being on the live show today. We were barely squeezing this in amongst your busy schedule to talk about a topic I know you're passionate about. Me, I'm very curious to learn more. And I hope kind of to dispel maybe some myths and really talk about a tool that's one, extremely trendy, which we know, but is also based in science as well. So as dietitians, we're always trying to meet our clients where they are, and leverage all the tools in our toolbox. So macro counting, if you're a fitness dietitian, it's probably something you talk about every single day, but I don't work in the world of fitness necessarily. So I know a lot of people tuning in today will know a lot more than me. So this will be a chance for you to answer some of their questions. And I've, of course, prepared some for us today. So Monica, why don't you kick off? Talk a little bit. You've been on the live show before, but I feel like so much has changed. It's only been a few months since we last had the live show, but your business is growing so much. So tell us a little bit about yourself and maybe kind of some exciting things that have been happening for you.
Yeah, definitely. So, just to give like the very beginning, in case anybody's brand new, I am living in Denver, Colorado. I moved here during my dietetic internship because I wasn't getting the sports and fitness experience that I wanted. And also just didn't really like the weather in New York. So I was like, okay, great weather in Denver. And there's a huge fitness wellness culture here that I need to get myself immersed in. So I asked my directors, hey, if I find a preceptor in Denver, can I move and do my community rotation and finish everything online there? And they said, yeah. So I made that happen. That was really great because one, it kind of prepared me for other making my own events that were really significant in my journey. And I also got connected with somebody who owns a company called Fitlo Denver, which basically immersed me in the blogging world and also got me into gyms and fitness studios in Denver, which is how I built my business, is being the dietitian that works with Denver gyms and fitness studios. So I have a local presence, and I was able to build that first by running challenges and doing just free nutrition workshops. I did a lot of free nutrition workshops. I was an ambassador for Athleta and did some there. Then gym and studio owners would go to the Athleta workshops and they'd be like, we'd love for you to come in and do one at our gym, work with our clients. And then because of the Athleta ambassadorship, I had to post on Instagram. And then I started sharing about my workshops. More people started to get attracted to my coaching business. And then at the same time I was doing all of that, I was also working as a full-time health coach for an app. And while the remote life was great and it allowed me to get a solid foundation of coaching without being a dietitian, which I think is very significant, because I couldn't rely on my RD hat. I was not counting macros or anything. I was pretty much just very motivational, interviewing heavy, talking about habits. But that was so foundational to the approach I have with my clients now. So that way, when I talk about that, I can talk about macro counting in a so much more mindful way. And that to me has made all the difference. So it got to a point where I couldn't grow mind on nutrition without letting something go. And I was just like, I need to just make a big move in my life again. And so I left my full-time job for in January of 2019. And
yeah, I'm going to switch over to my headset because I think I unplugged myself and someone was talking a little bit of an echo that people are hearing when you're speaking. So I'm wondering if it's my speaker picking you up. So I'm actually going to put on a different set of headsets. So we're going to see if that might help. I don't love wearing this, but let's do it.
broadcast.
All right. Okay. It makes me feel claustrophobic.
Oh, is it tight?
Yeah. Yeah. All right. We'll see if that's a little bit better.
Okay.
Oh, no. It said she just cut out. So it's better now. Okay. Fixed it. The joys of live video. Okay. If anybody still has an issue, let us know.
Yes, definitely.
Okay.
So
that's kind of background.
Yeah. So that's kind of how I got to where I am, and the significant pieces in my journey that really did, I think, set me up to be able to do macro coaching in a way that's not what the initial knee jerk reaction is when people hear that term or
Yeah.
see that.
I just love it because you really went after what you wanted, and really very, I don't want to say pretty strategically as far as in your internship. You mentioned local presence. You mentioned giving free workshops. You mentioned a lot of the things that people might be doing now and going like, oh, I'm just not where I want to be. And that a lot of it, you look back and you're like, all of those things were pivotal. They were all really important. But at the time, sometimes you're like, is this ever really going to pan out? Am I really, can I build the success that I have? So I love talking and getting people's backstory on the show because they never like snapped their fingers and woke up the next day with the business that they have now.
And I still don't think I have the business that I have now. Of course, from everybody else's view, it might look like, oh, she's crushing it, but I'm still like, okay, what's next? What am I doing? Like,
Yeah.
what in September? Oh, I've got these workshops signed up, but can I interject here? Like, I've
Spoken,
always
spoken like a true entrepreneur. We're always, trying to grow a little bit more, and there's always some way to do better, do more. So let's talk. So you started to talk about well, a general overview of how you approach things with your clients, because you threw out some terms of coaching, your dietitian hat, macro counting. So how does that really fit within the services that you offer? Someone comes in and like, I want to hook me up with a macro plan. Kind of walk us through your approach and how this all fits.
Yes. So it's great that you asked this question, but I had to be honest, my approach is so much more driven by my client than by me. So it's not like a client walks into the door and goes, I want what you have to offer. Well, I want this program. It's more like, hey, I have these goals. Nutrition is important. How can you help me get there? And what I've found is there's definitely tools in the tool belt that helps. Understanding the basics of nutrition is probably the most lacking thing in the community and just in nutrition wellness culture in general. People will get so, I think it's called shiny object syndrome, right? When they're distracted by all the things.
Yes.
And that's why something as trendy as whatever X diet, it grabs their attention because they don't even understand the basics of nutrition to see why that doesn't actually work. So that's what to me macro counting is. It's like very foundational. So right away when I do an exploration discovery call, I just call it a free nutrition consult because I think people like that. And it's 20 minutes. I get them on the phone and we're just talking about like what's going on. How'd you find me? And a lot of people find me on Instagram. They love my Instagram stories. They're like, I feel like you're talking to me in my living room. So that's a great marketing tool if anybody's like looking to increase their marketing. And then when I onboard them, there's the initial assessment paperwork, all of that stuff that we kind of learned in dietetics. But then I start doing goal setting and motivation. And one of the major goals that, two of the major goals that we define is high body confidence and low food stress. Because for me, in the Denver fitness world, it's like people want body confidence. It doesn't have to be weight loss, but a lot of times it is fat loss, body fat loss, or muscle building, or just feeling strong in the gym or crushing a triathlon. And so we define what high body confidence is. And then we define what low food stress is, because that's the piece that I think is so important whenever you're adopting a nutrition protocol. And honestly, I feel like I've been able to successfully teach what nutrition is, which it is just understanding the basic macronutrients. How your nutrition, like how does your food meet your nutrition needs? Because we all have them. But keeping the food stress low. And honestly, sometimes people like I have to go through a lot of the intuitive eating approach with them. More mindful eating, but understanding hunger cues, fullness cues in a way that supports not only their high body confidence goals, but their low food stress goals, because they're both equally important in my book. And so with my approach, what I've been doing lately is when we check in, I look at their food logs and we come up with the wins. I always start off with wins first. And then we look at how their food choices have met their macronutrient goals whether or not they meet perfectly, we're looking at trends. We're not looking for perfection. But then I'm able to see, oh, you felt really good when you had this many grams of protein. And look, your needs are about here. So let's try and hit that goal a couple more times this week. And then I find them recipes. And another thing I use a lot with them is my macro guide that I have in RD2RD Marketplace. This is definitely like super helpful because I go through examples with them. This is probably the page I use the most, which is where do we get our macros? So that's, it starts with the conversation about goals, moves into let's track your food, let's gather the data of your body, and let's just constantly check in and revise only when things aren't going in the direction we want. So it's awesome in this world, like really getting into the psychology, but also helping people reach performance goals. It's like a win-win.
Yeah. So I like that you have kind of the structured approach that you take with your clients. I think you started to touch on something about intuitive eating, and then you mentioned we're talking about macro counting, all kind of in the same general idea. And I think it's really interesting. If you're on social media, right, it's all about engagement and kind of, I don't want to say inflammation, but reaction, right? And I think it's really easy to say, it's a side by side, and it's way more interesting if we can pit one against each other, or we can tell us how they're different versus you really said it starts with your client. So talk about this whole concept of intuitive eating and fitness and macro counting and how that happens for you.
Yeah, well, it's a very individual thing again. What I'm thinking of immediately right now is I have this one client who came to me initially wanting body composition changes, and she worked out like really hard at the gym. It was a CrossFit-esque gym, but not the brand. And she ran, she did yoga, so she was doing her workouts. She was eating well, but she wanted to achieve this other physique and performance goal. So when we were working through this together, we actually had to like first identify, what does hunger even mean to you? What does fullness even mean to you? She did so much foundational work before we even got into like the logging of things. And now she's logging her meals every day, hitting her goals, all of them, and she's still coming to terms with those intuitive eating morsels because we really had to challenge a lot of diet mentality. I think that's just in general what it makes like a big by where does that diet piece come from? An old diet, a friend, something that's going on. So now she's able to log her food, doesn't feel like a diet at all because she's just trying to nourish her body. And she knows when she doesn't nourish her body with the right fuels, she just feels bleh. And that's because of all the intuitive eating work that we did in the beginning. It's like kind of just like knowing what does good nutrition feel like to you, then we'll find what your needs are and try to get you to match them more consistently. So we did that approach with her, and she's doing phenomenally well because it's a lot of that mindset piece and just nourishing her body. And she's funny. She always uses the words, she goes, it's just good nutrition. Like, I just feel like I'm nourishing my body. And I'm like, yeah, that's the goal. I think that when you know what your macronutrient needs are, you know what your nutrition needs are. And so when you're meeting those, well, and hopefully with nutrient dense foods, which we talk a lot about, but yeah, that's how I'm blending it together. There's pros and cons to both. I'm very well aware of that. And there's even a page in my macro guide about pros and cons to intuitive eating and pros and cons to macro coaching, just so people know that, like, listen, we can pit against each other all we want, but there's pros and cons to both approaches. Right. So at the end of the day, whatever's going to help meet my clients' goals, needs, and improve their nutrition, I mean, that's why I got into this business, you know?
Yeah. And we have Deborah saying, she wanted to know if you find it hard to track food and meet goals while still being intuitive, and then kind of the overlap there, which I think you were addressing.
Yeah. Is it hard to track your food and not be intuitive? Well, I'm going to ask this. How do you really know if you're being intuitive or if you're operating on habits? Because a lot of times, as a human, we just operate on automatic responses. So is that intuition, or is that just because we're used to doing that? And so that's like a whole other question, kind of conversation to have. But that's why I don't feel like it's hard to track and be intuitive, because what you're doing when you're tracking is you're just collecting data, because we want to know, what do your habits look like, and then how do we improve them. And it's not like they're trying to log to always meet a number at first. It's more like just track the data, because we don't go for perfection. We're just trying to see, what are you actually nourishing your body with. So
I think you made some important points about really that hunger and fullness, and what does that feel like. I think you're right. A lot of people really are extremely disconnected from what does full mean and what does satisfied mean, and defining body confidence and low food stress, that really puts the priorities on the table and frames it in a way that's valuable for the client, it's clear for you, and I'm sure is highly individualized from that point forward with each client.
and that's the other thing too, is like, I think that because we're talking a little bit about the polarity between them, I think right now there's a wave of hone in on your brand as a dietitian and be very whatever. But I really do think that, like, at the end of the day, it's what your client needs you for most, and it's support, a sounding board, and your expert knowledge. So try not to drive a wedge into one thing. Just use all the tools that you have, and that's gonna be what makes them most successful. Your client, anyways. But yeah, it's an interesting journey, and I know I probably ruffle a lot of feathers when I talk about intuitive eating and macro counting. But at the end
Yeah.
of the day, I see nutrition foundations. Like, what was the first lesson we learned? I think that there's 6 essential nutrients that you must eat, and everybody has their own needs. And that's what I'm doing with macro counting. So
Yeah. I think it's good to bust a few little myths around one or the other. And I think it's so easy for us to try to make things black and white, when in reality, I think when we talk about macro counting, what most people see is, I can't eat this because it doesn't fit in my macro plan goal, versus, how can I build a meal that's going to leave me feeling full and satisfied? And that might look different for me, and it might look different based on the kind of day or the workout that I'm having, or it might look different based on the, honest to goodness, the time of the month for me, or whatever.
gosh, it does change. The luteal phase and the follicular phase do change your nutrition needs.
Yeah.
That's the thing.
Yeah, and I think with fitness it's really important, because if you're working with people who are, I mean, for example, I had a really ridiculous plyometric workout yesterday where I thought I was going to die. But if I don't change what I eat on a day like that, the whole it's you don't want to swim upstream, right? It's just, how do I fuel so that I feel satisfied, so I don't get a headache? So, and I think these are, it's not about calories or a weight, but it's about, like you mentioned, feeling satisfied.
How do I fuel my body? And
Yeah.
that, so I've worked with NFL combine athletes, and I've worked with your weekend warriors at the gym, and there, even though one's at an elite level and one's at like just hanging out doing the active thing on the weekend, your body operates on fuel that everybody needs. It's essential to live. So if you're not matching your fuel demands with your nutrition, then you're gonna bunk, and then you're not gonna feel good. That healthy lifestyle is not going to be any more sustainable now, because you don't have that nutrition to support you. And so, yeah, when you had your crazy plyometric workout, I wouldn't be surprised if your appetite becomes a little bit higher, because that changes your hormone levels, and you just are exhausting the anaerobic tanks, and your body is like, hey, homie, I need some more fuel. But how much fuel do you need? We don't know, but we can try and track some data to see what makes you feel the best. I think you mentioned too, like, what feels good for you might not feel good for me. And that does play a huge role. Like, I have clients who are like, I feel really good with like more protein and more fat. But then I have other people who are like, I feel way better when I have like more carbohydrates and a little less protein, and fat is like just part of the diet. And that to me is the coolest thing about nutrition, because there's a lot we still don't know about the human body, but we do know basic calories, macros, and micronutrients too, which I spend a lot of time looking at. But
It's actually really, I think this insight is good. I think all of us want the best for our clients, and I think sometimes under the guise of, I don't know, factions, right? Or areas that I think deep down, ultimately, we're really trying to do right by our clients and provide the best possible nutrition care. And I think knowing that, I always say, would a rational, reasonable person behave this way? So would someone, would another dietitian use a strategy that is intended to harm other people? And I think sometimes you're not in the session, you're not with the client. And I think having the respect for our colleagues that they're truly, they're might be taking a different approach from you, but they're coming from a place of helping as well. So
yeah, the client
whether
goals.
it's intuitive eating or macro coaching or whatever strategy you take, that we can just all respect one another.
I mean, I think that's why it's important to always keep your ears open, and for your professional community, just listening to what's going on. But then also, what are your clients? What not even let's not even use the word clients. What do humans want? They want to be steered in the right direction to help them improve their goals, improve their life. That's it. That's at the end of the day. So
So let's kind of switch gears again and talk about, you started to talk about how you structure your visits and your education. You mentioned your macro guide. So I think this is something that, if you're trying to get into working with fitness clients at gyms, you said you have this introductory call. So you mentioned you're kind of doing some goal setting. Talk to us a little bit about how this structure works for your visits. Maybe do you start with a certain number? How does that work?
of sessions, or
Yeah, like how do you structure things when you're working with a new client from the beginning?
okay, so my onboarding process maybe is
Hmm.
what you're looking for.
And maybe under the guise of, if we're saying, we're using macro counting, and I think this is where you're not leading with that, right?
Oh,
When you decide that, okay, this person's going to benefit from
from
really.
a more numerical approach.
Yeah, you're like, and how do you know? Like you mentioned the pros and cons, so talk a little bit about how you're going through your and how you're like, we shouldn't take this approach. Like, how does that play out? How does that play out?
Yeah, I love this question too, because automatically I have them keep food journals tracking in an app right away before their first session. And this does a couple of things. Number one, it gives us both data. And I think I say this a lot on Instagram, but I'm going to say it now. If I'm an accountant and somebody's coming to me for financial advice and they don't show me how much money they're spending or what they're earning, how the heck am I going to help them? Same thing as a dietitian. If I'm not seeing what you're eating and what you're expending, because that is nutrition, then I don't know how to guide. So that is one reason why I always have people log their food before they see me. Number two, it assesses their readiness to change and commit, because if they're not able to do like a basic tracking, like I even say, like, write in a food journal, like blank piece of paper, just come to me with some data of what you're nourishing your body with. And if they're not able to do that, then I'm kind of like, okay, well then you're definitely not ready to track in an app, right? That to me is an obvious sign. But then also maybe there's other things going on with your nutrition that we need to like get in at in session one. And a lot of times it's very telling how somebody who wants nutrition advice comes to me but isn't showing me their nutrition. It's like, okay, what are we really talking about here? And then we start to get into the more of like those mindful, I don't even know what hunger feels like, kind of like I've gone on a lot of diets conversations that would fit in the umbrella of intuitive eating. And so that's how I would know, okay, well, we're not going to track in an app, but I use Healthy as a practice management tool, and they have a photo food journal, which is great because that's still capturing data, but it's super qualitative. I'm just looking at a plate of food. I can see colors. I can see the bigger things.
You can see that it's always in their car because the steering wheel's always behind it. I always find that interesting with my clients. Like, why are you constantly eating roasted chickpeas in your car? Is that all you eat? I'm kidding. It always makes me laugh.
I've seen salad bowls. I'm like, is that your steering wheel?
Again.
Salad. Yeah. And again, behaviors. Oh, so also in my approach to my coaching is I always touch on what are nutrition behaviors you want to improve, nutrition portions that you want to improve, and nutrition swaps or food choices, because no matter what the goal is there something that you can change? Sometimes the behavior is like, I need to not stand at the counter and eat. I need to sit down. And the portion might be, I need to eat more protein earlier in the day because by the time I'm like at 12 o'clock, I just have no energy. And it's like, oh, well, because you showed me data, I know what you're eating. I can make that nutrition education piece and tell you protein is going to keep you fuller longer. Here are the foods. I use my guide for that. I'm like, here are the foods that are just going to provide you protein because you're meeting all your other nutrition needs. And that's kind of what they come to me for. I feel like that's what they think they're going to dietitians for. Anyways, but yeah, it's so I'll do photo food journaling if they don't feel they're ready to do any sort of macro tracking or tracking in an app. And you know what? Sometimes they come to me with a perfect log that's super meticulous, and I'm like, that's also a sign. And then we start to uncover, why is your food only these foods every single day? Why aren't you eating carbohydrates? And you worked out really hard that day. Oh, okay. Our goal is going to be to not track in an app, and you had to eat a potato this week. Like, so again, it's very
It's really interesting. I am a healthy user too, but it's interesting the feelings around eating. It's some clients, like, literally every day at work, their lunch meal, they're always anxious, 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 and yet on the weekend, breakfast, happy, blah blah. I'm like, let's talk about what's going on at work, because you are a stress case while you're at work. So I think it's really interesting you mentioned like the photo journaling or mood around eating, these playing a role in our food choices. But I think this is really interesting, Monica, because we seem to say this macro counting, this is what I'm using with my clients. Like, I'm gonna like say I'm a macro dietitian and come and see me, and I'm gonna just clean you up with this macro plan goal counting, when in reality it doesn't really look a whole lot like that in practice, right?
No, I mean, because at some point you do want to differentiate yourself from like a calculator on Google, right? Because like technically anybody can go macrocalculator.com, I think is what it's called, and it gets some numbers and spit it out. But that's just basic. That's just the foundation. That's just like one piece of the puzzle. It's an important piece though, for sure, because even trying to teach like about food labels, well, what are you looking at when you're looking at food labels? You're looking at macros and micros. So it's something that needs to be there, but also you need to be able to have the skills that dietitians have with counseling and behavior change modification and being a supporting person with some knowledge, right? Because we do have that expertise and we should be able to use it. That really separates you from, Joe Schmo.
Yes. So, Katie, thank you so much. Saying, great way to describe it, Monica. Use all the knowledge you have as an RD to help your client. And I'd say I can't use that technique because I'm not that kind of dietitian. I'm this kind of dietitian. Anyway, so let's talk a little bit about apps and technology. There was a question about that for success with macro counting. So when you're mentioned, you use an app or you have them track. What are some kind of workflow for you? Because I don't know, but looking at those logs is kind of time consuming. And how do you do that in a practical way before the visit? Talk about that process.
So let's pretend this is a client that I've already been seeing. We've assessed that they can log, everything is great, and they're doing very well. What I will do is I will open up it's called nutritionix.com, and that's an app. So it's actually green and white, and that's what I have my clients use. And what they do is they become, I become their coach because I have a special ID, and I open up my coach portal, and I can't really show you because hashtag, but I can look at all of my clients who are logging in this app. Some people are using my MyFitnessPal. I don't really care for my MyFitnessPal very much.
I think Chronometer has a professional version too, right?
That I've heard of that one too. A lot of people who are already doing MyFitnessPal, I try to not shake up too many leaves on the tree. So I'm like, okay, let's do this. But
can you spell that app for me? I'm going to type it in to answer the question.
Oh yeah, it's Nutrition IX. They were at Penn State too.
Nutrition IX. Sorry about the Nutrition IX. Okay.
And so I open that up. I log into my dashboard, and then I open up Healthy. I open up my client's metrics, and then I open up a third tab, which is two more.
So the
tabs.
metrics within
Healthy.
Okay.
And then I open up macrokitchen.com for recipes. And then I open up my client's Excel spreadsheet. And what I do is I always ask them, all right, tell me your wins. So we start off with the wins. I do some light charting and healthy on that kind of qualitative data. And then that leads into, I had these wins, but then these were losses. And, so we kind of do some coaching there in that first 20 minutes. The next 10 minutes, I look at their food log and I talk about, okay, looks, your breakfast is on point. You're doing, that smoothie is always there. It makes you feel good. We might chit chat about that. But then I'll notice something like, oh, I noticed that you said you were really hungry and your fats that day were really low. And your fats have kind of been consistently low. Let's talk about it. And then what we'll do is we'll just go in and kind of workshop. Maybe you're adding just a bigger portion of fat, or maybe you don't know what foods have fat. So I have to go to my macro guide and go, okay, here's the foods that are just fat.
So your macro, the actual plan, so they know what their targets are for each meal. Is that a tool you created, or is that within one of the resources?
So the Healthy Metrics actually has Mifflin St. Gior. So if a client logs their height and their weight, their gender, I am able to look at what their needs are, and I calculated their macrograms based on that number, that calorie number. Oh, side note, I also work/partner with a physiology place in Denver called Beacon, and they have a DEXA machine which spits out a beautiful report that I love so much, and it gives their RMR. So that's another tool that I use.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, that's really fun.
But as far as that translated into, because I think it's hard if you're logging, right? And you're like, okay, well, how much do I need at this meal? So making that translation between, did I hit my target? What is the target?
So that Excel spreadsheet that I open up, I have their macronutrients by day, but then I also do it by meal. And most of my clients are eating probably 3 to 4 times a day. So I divide it by meal. And I tell them, I'm like, if this is just by meal, by no means you have to get this every meal. They know that. We have that counseling piece. And so they're able to look and see oh, okay, this is, I should be getting around 30 grams of protein a meal. Go into Starbucks, get the egg bites and the whatever. And then I'm like, oh, I'm at 26. That's around what I need. And that's the approach. That's how I can make macro counting not this rigid, strict thing, is because we have that conversation. It's just that you're just aiming for a target to hit your goal.
Right. Which one's important? Okay. So that's nice to know the different tools that you use. Do you spend a lot of time before the visit reviewing that information? Because I think we're always looking at how much time, or do you find that you can do it, during the visit?
I've been able to get everything done during the visit, but because I'm just personally interested. For example, I have a client at 8 a.m. on Wednesdays every week. And I mean, I pop into her food log on a Saturday or a Sunday, and I'm like, oh, she's vlogging. That's good. Because I think that's what, I'm personally interested in. I want to see what they're doing. Also, when I'm doing cardio, it's really good for me to just look and see. But in general, my actual practice when I'm trying to not work, when I'm not working, I can get all of this done in 45, 50 minutes, and it's very successful. They know they walk away having like a good foundation of what they need to work on next and how they're going to nourish their body. And most of my clients meal prep in some way. So that's why I give them recipes to support their macronutrient needs. And
so where do you feel like clients will tend to struggle the most with with macro counting or the targets? Where do they struggle, and what strategies do you use?
I find the biggest struggle is I would say one of the biggest struggles is maybe getting into the habit of it consistently. If they're not, but that's usually just a matter of like, hey, this is new. It's kind of like exercising. Like, hey, this is new. You're just gonna have to commit. You're just gonna have to do it. There's no real struggles like psychologically ever. Nobody's ever been triggered. Although one time I had a conversation with somebody about like calories, and because MyFitnessPal will tell you, actually most apps will tell you like you're going over, you're under, or whatever. So what I do is I'm like, oh, make your calorie goal 3,000. You're never gonna be told that you had too much. So that's another like little hack. But nobody has ever like been so triggered that they have felt like, oh, I can't do this. It's like,
Right. And I think some of what you mentioned, that pre-work of establishing kind of the hunger and fullness, and rather than from a counting calorie angles, that they're able to kind of maybe ignore the calorie goal a bit more, where they might not have been able to at the beginning.
yes. And one of the bigger struggles I've heard, not from my clients, but clients who have come to me, people, members, humans. Sometimes I feel bad saying clients every time. But anyways, they come to me and they're like, I used to do macro coaching and I just could not eat my protein needs. I'm always like, then don't, because I can't sit here and tell you to, honor your hunger and fullness, but make sure you have 150 whatever, which is probably too high anyways. Like, let's be real. Most of the time, the old numbers that they got were from somebody who didn't really have an understanding of the basics of nutrition, but gave them numbers. So, yeah, I could go on and on about that. But
Yeah.
and that's where, because I would honestly be a hypocrite if I told people they have to hit their macro goals, but even if you're full, and if you're hungry or not hungry, you have to hit them. Like, no, that stuff always needs to come first, and then we look at like the other parts of your nutrition. So yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because that comes up a lot.
Yeah. I think that you've given a lot of tips as far as dietitians that want to use macro counting, and I feel like sometimes we're necessarily, I don't want to say fearful of, that approach of the counting part, of, incorporating that. And what does it say about me or my practice, or it's not flexible. And then I think a tool is how we necessarily use it, not how it's portrayed on an Instagram post or in that. What tools do we have in our toolbox as a clinician?
Yeah, so I wish I knew why it got so shunned, because when you're a dietitian and you're doing TPN, you're macro counting. You know what their calorie needs are, what their carbs are. So why is that okay when they're sick, but not okay when they're not sick? I don't get it.
I think you've got a little Instagram side by side. Helpful, still helpful. Calculating TPN for sick people. No.
I remember studying so hard for those tests to do somebody who was.
And I think you made a point, Monica. I think you made a point about, and I think why it's valuable for you is that counting calories for the sake of counting, or macros or whatever, is helpful, question mark. No, using information about how much you're eating and a target that helps you achieve satisfaction, satiety, and being aware of what that feels like is powerful and helps you achieve results. Just putting what you're eating in an app without really understanding how it's connected to your personal fullness is not as helpful. And so I think you kind of framed it in a way that's like, this is how I could see it working in the real world practice of fitness clients that come in that have a goal, or they really need some structure, but they also really need to understand what it looks like and feels like for them to be satisfied, how to respond to hunger or prevent themselves from getting over hungry. So this is really helpful for me. I'm gonna check on the questions here.
And also, I hope people know this. I work with people who have performance goals. I work with athletes who have very specific, like I'm training to be in the NFL, or I'm training for a triathlon, and I know there's sports nutrition research that says there's a certain number of carbohydrates I should have in a day. What is that? Because I don't know, but you do. So help me out.
Yeah,
And
I
that's
think
what I'm here for. I'm like, oh well, let me put on my dietitian goggles here, my hat, whatever, and I punch some numbers because that's what I spent undergrad doing.
that's right.
Now I get to help them crush their goals.
So some questions. Macro what, as far as an app? The macro, I think you were mentioning Macro Kitchen, which is a meal planning.
Macrokitchen.com is a website.
Oh, okay.
It's basically a way to type in macronutrients, 30 grams of protein, 15 grams of fat, 60 grams of carbs, whatever, and it spits out all of these recipes that fit pretty much within that. It's super helpful because, again, people with nutrition needs need to meet those needs, and I want people to cook. So, like, here are some recipes that are really conducive to those goals that we talked about in your session, and it gets you in the habit of meal planning, meal prepping, and nourishing your body with nutrient dense fuels. So that's macrokitchen.com.
Okay. And then let's see, Julie, how do you package your services? Like, do you do an initial plus so many, how many texts per week? I think people always want to know, okay, so how do you actually sell this stuff?
So I love this question because I left a full-time salaried position, but a salary is really nice. So
Yeah, consistent.
so I actually offer there's two avenues that I will guide a a client, a member. If they have certain goals that I know they won't be able to reach within less than a year, then they become part of my 12 months lifestyle program, and they commit to 12 months. There's a contract put in place where I'm like, you can't back out of this. If you do, you still have to pay this amount. So that's one option. That is my favorite option because it shows them right away that you're working with me for a lifestyle change. This isn't a one and done thing. So if you have this goal, like let's say like somebody wants to lose 30 pounds, that's
That's a
not
year.
minimum
Exactly.
minimum a year. And that's and I think when they hear that, they kind of go, oh, like, I never really thought about it. And that's why I do it that way, because if they're already thinking like I want to lose 30 pounds but I can't commit to a year, that person and I might not work the best together because they might want something more extreme that I just don't do. I just don't, and I'm trying to be realistic. However, some people just want to look
With
in
that package, are they getting a visit every
oh
week, month, text, virtual, call, all that kind of stuff?
Oh, okay. So it's my 12-month program. They get 24 sessions to use in the year. I don't care when they use them. They can use them every other week. Or what will happen is it might be vacation heavy month for them, and I won't see them for a month. But then if they maybe want to see me like twice in 1 week, like a Monday and a Friday, then they can do that. So I just let them come to me as many times, and Healthy is really good at keeping track of how many sessions they have left. So I can just see like this many credits. And you can also change in Healthy how often you bill them. I always bill people monthly, but I have a client right now who gets charged bi-weekly for that lifestyle program. So it's very flexible and it works. And what else? We check in person. It's about 45 minutes a session. But I also offer virtual. However, a lot of people are like, no, I want to come meet you in person. And so we'll do that. And people always want to know, where do I meet my clients? I meet them in a business center. It's a private office, and that's where I meet them. When sometimes I bring people to the gym that I work at, and I'm in a private conference room. but most of the time I'm at the business center. And then there's also a wellness space that I get to use at a yoga studio every now and again. So I've got options. Very grateful. And then that's that program. Did I cover all the bases?
I
Oh,
think so.
one more thing. When they're on that program, what they have access to is like any and all documents that they want. So what I do is if we talk about, for example, fueling after a workout, or I upload my macro guide to that client, because those clients always get my macro guide for free. I upload that to their documents. So it's unlimited documents. If they want me to make them a meal plan, it depends on what they're actually like wanting, but I usually just include that as an added value because most of the time they don't want a meal plan. But like it's the option is there if they need that extra tool, like tell me what to eat. Fine, like, I'll do it. But nobody ever does that. Nobody has yet. What else? That's pretty much it for that program.
I know we're like running out of time today too. So for so many people who have like questions. So let's just kind of, maybe people want to connect with you and ask you more questions, or how can people find out more?
So you can follow me on Instagram, Denver Fitness Dietitian. I changed my handle recently. Yeah, it was funny. People were like,
Who's that?
And I'm like, yes. I didn't make an announcement. I guess it's a thing people do. Oh, and that's probably the best way to reach me. And my email, mindonnutrition@gmail.com. Another great way to really, really get, if you want to like set something up, because I do offer like a mentorship option for other RDs just to like
Nice.
brain. I'd love for people to pick my brain for free, but if I was a farmer and I let all my friends pick my vegetables for free, I would not have a business. So I'm not like a business coach by any means. I'm more just like here to like honestly pick my brain. Let me help you get your stuff started or tell you what tools are really helpful. So that's another way.
Cool. That's good to know that. I think sometimes it's just the logistics, the structure, the tools that can really go a long way to be helpful. So thank you so very much for coming on the live show, people. You can pick up Monica's Dietitian's Guide to Macro Counting in her store on RD2RD. It's pretty awesome. Let's just say it. It's kind of like completely done for you resource that kind of, I think hearing you talk about it allows you to. That all that framework that you talked about, like a page on comparing intuitive eating and macro counting and all that stuff, that it isn't it's a different tool.
A lot of intuitive eating dietitians would probably appreciate the way I talk about macronutrients in the guide. Like I think it'd be kind of a surprise for a lot of people. But
Yeah, it's probably not what you think of. It's not your average macro kind of approach that people might tend to associate with that term, macro coaching. So thank you so much for being on the show. We are wrapping up for today, and we'll be back in a couple of weeks with Katrina Pace. She's going to talk about writing words that sell. She's a copywriter, and she's like certified in email marketing copy and all about landing pages, sales pages, how to write in a way that helps our humans who visit our site take the action that we want them to, or other things. So it'll be a lot of fun to have her on the show. So thank you again, Monica, for being with us today.
Yes, thank you so much. Always a pleasure.
All right. Thanks, Monica.